So you know that saying, they don't make things like they used to? That actually is true, and it seems like everybody uses that phrase at one point or another, but let me give you a couple reasons actually why that's happening. And let me also say this, I'm not going to talk about cost cutting. Cost cutting is definitely one of the reasons, but I'm not going to bring that up because you already know that. So has there been cost cutting over the past 20 years in particular? Yes. Has there been more pressure on manufacturers for cost cutting? Yes. But you already know that. So hopefully I'm going to give you a couple of things in this video that are actually helpful to you that you may not have known prior. One of the reasons why companies don't make things the way they used to and things don't last as long as they used to is because, quite honestly, companies don't need to anymore. Now, that's not a sinister issue, and part of the reason is actually because of us. It really is. So just watch this entire video. I hope you will, and hopefully you'll get a good amount of information out of this. So I'm going to use a couple of examples. I'm going to use cars, and then I'm going to use cameras, but take a look at cars for a moment. In terms of reliability, cars have definitely improved over the past 15 to 20 years. In terms of durability, yes, they've gone down. In other words, the reliability has increased when you buy a brand new car, or if you buy a slightly used car, it's going to last longer until it starts needing some either moderate or major repairs, that sort of thing. However, the durability in terms of how long that car will last overall has been in decline. Now, it's not as though car manufacturers don't know how to make cars that last a long time. It's because they don't need to. Part of this has to do with consumer behavior. So most people, and you know what, the statistics are there for you. It's probably somewhere around 6 to 7 out of 10 people lease a car these days as opposed to buying a car, and the average lease being about 3 years or so. So in 3 years' time, pretty much any brand, unless there's some specific recall or it's just a lemon, which does happen from time to time, but pretty much any brand that you would buy or, lease is actually not going to break down within 3 years, and you probably are going to have essentially zero problems with it. You're just going to, have the oil changed, maybe depending on how aggressive of a driver you are, maybe you have to do the brakes and the tires, maybe you don't, whatever the case. So that's actually a part of what's going on here. If a company knows that you as their consumer, you as their customer, is going to purchase something and only hold on to it for a certain amount of time, then why would they necessarily put in the added cost of having the durability of that product to maintain itself over an extended, period? They don't have to do that. So if you take a look at this, right? So this is a 1985 Mercedes-Benz S-Class. And for its time, it was, a pinnacle. It was all the best technology, etc., right? All that good stuff. Now you take a look at the 2021 Mercedes-Benz S-Class, a beautiful car. It's got every single bell and whistle probably that you can imagine. And clearly, just so you know I'm not crazy, the brand new one, the 2021, is loaded with so many features. And part of that, by the way, is just a function of time. It's not, the fault of any company, or in this case, Mercedes-Benz in 1985. Actually, they were at the top of the innovation spectrum. But of course, the 2021 is going to have more features that the 85 is not going to have. But the 1985 S-Class, I guarantee you, is going to last a lot longer, actually a hell of a lot longer than the 2021, no matter how you want to measure it. Now again, I'm not talking about reliability per se, I'm talking about durability. I do believe that, in 1985, the reliability of this particular car was really good, and the reliability nowadays, Mercedes had sort of their dark days in the late 90s, early 2000s to mid 2000s. That was because of mainly Jurgen Schremp and the disastrous Daimler Chrysler merger. But those days are behind them. So both of these cars are reliable, but the 1985 is going to last a lot longer. If you think about what was going on in 1985, what was that, 35, 36 years ago, people used to buy a car, and there really weren't that many leases, by the way. I mean, I remember leases sort of became really popular with consumers some point in the 90s. It wasn't really the case in the 80s. You know, maybe leases in the 80s were really just for businesses. So up until the 80s, maybe even the late 80s, early 90s, etc., when people bought a car, first off, they bought it, they didn't lease it, and second off, people used to keep cars for a long time. Like I said, people don't do that anymore. So why would Mercedes-Benz, or any company for that matter, need to put in that amount of durability when they're not going to get any, quote, credit for that? In other words, the value proposition does not extend over to durability because you're not going to keep it. So there's a second thing going on these days in terms of why companies don't build things the way they used to, and it has to do with how and why we are so incredibly dependent on tech. And nowadays, tech is really running the show, unfortunately, not only from a media perspective, but also from a product perspective. So take a look at cameras. Now, back in the day, I remember, and I think my dad may actually still have this camera somewhere. So you look at, you know, a Minolta camera like this, which, you know, for its time was probably relatively expensive. It was a solid camera. It was made in Japan. It was, you know, manufactured to some pretty strict quality standards. And for a while, when we lived in a 35 millimeter world, so to speak, with cameras, before we moved to a digital world, I mean, sure, was there technology in this camera for its time? Of course there was, but there wasn't actually as much technology that would change as frequently as it does today. Today, every single time a camera comes out, and you know, these days, for the most part being digital, next year another camera comes out, and so on and so forth. And mainly the only thing that changes is the number of megapixels, right? And I know there's a couple of additional features that sort of might kind of, you know, find their way into the next generation camera. But if you really think about it, so you have a company like GoPro, and I have nothing against GoPro, but you take a company like GoPro, and GoPro, just like an iPhone, cranks out a new camera every single year. Why on earth do you need a new GoPro camera every single year? And I know a lot of people vlog, a lot of people have YouTube channels. Nonetheless, you know, fine, if you have a GoPro from 5-6 years ago versus now, is there a difference? Sure there is. I'm not denying that, but I still have to maintain my point where you don't need a brand new GoPro camera every single year. I'm sorry, you just don't. And GoPro gets to get away with this because, hey, you've got the GoPro, I think they're up to 9 right now. Hey, you've got the GoPro 9, and a year prior you had the 8, and a year prior you had the 7. Well, you know what? You need the 10 this year because it's like, you know, 1 more megapixel, and it's got more whatever the case, and a little bit more jazz here and there. I mean, I'm sorry. It's going to be just as good as the GoPro 9. It really is. And sometimes people may disagree with that. I will respect that to the extent that I can, but it really is just as good. And the other point is that we live in a disposable world right now. I don't mean, you know, this is not my sociological side. This is my pure business. This is purely a marketing comment. We live in a disposable culture, a product culture, where we no longer repair things. We just dispose of them, we get rid of them. So the camera repair shop, which used to be fairly prevalent, and they used to, you know, either service, once upon a time you got your camera serviced, meaning you got it cleaned, you know, the internals, etc. Or, you know, once in a while when your camera, your 35 millimeter camera did break, you did get it repaired. Same thing with TVs. I was a little kid in the 1980s, but I remember at some point in the mid-1980s, could have been 1985, 1986, my parents bought this particular TV, which at the time was a really big deal. This was when Zenith was, you know, Sony was a good brand in the 80s, but this was when Zenith was still a good brand that people respected. and Zenith came out with this TV called the System 3. It was a floor model. It had a actual phone, meaning you had your landline, and there was literally a phone outlet built into the TV where you can just, if you had an extension to your landline, and when your phone rang, your TV would ring, and you could actually, you could answer the call with your remote control, and there was it was essentially a speakerphone. The quality of it was so, but it was super high innovation at the time, and it was very expensive, by the way. It was a very expensive TV. I'm actually a little surprised that my parents bought it, to be really honest with you. But there were a couple of times where something broke on it, or the picture wasn't working right anymore, and the TV repair person actually came and did a house visit, and they would basically do their diagnosis, and they would repair it. It would be unheard of. I don't even think the TV repair person even exists anymore. That would be unheard of, by the way, these days. It would be truly unheard of. So now you know a couple reasons why companies, quote, don't make things the way they used to. Part of it has to do with consumer behavior, and the other piece of it is how technology is playing an ever-increasing role. And what happens is that because technology is so incredibly strong these days, it's taking on a binary role where something works and we use it, and then when it stops working, we just throw it out, as well as we just want, the latest and greatest just a year later, just for a couple of little minimal parts of innovation. But most of us, unfortunately, we're still sort of getting, kind of bamboozled into that. And this is why companies don't make things the way they used to, because once again, they really don't have to. So send me your comments and questions, and each week you'll get a chance to win a copy of one of my books. Your choice, either my book on presentation skills or business writing skills.